only two things, there are only two factors that determine behavior. The genes and the environment. And we are genes sculpted by the environment.
Hello and welcome back. I'm Andrew. This is Human Impact, and today I'm very excited to be joined by Professor George Paxinos, who is an environmental activist and professor of neuroscience. George, welcome to the show.
Good day, Ed.
Good day. First question for you. You have such an eminent career. You've been studied at all the major universities around the world, pretty much. Yet on your bio, it says first environmental activist rather than neuroscientist, because your entire career in academia and science is neuroscience. Yet you, I guess maybe is it your legacy now or something that you want to dive more into? I was just curious, why put that first?
For neuroscience, I received salary increases, professorship. It was, for me, it was a nice game. It is a puzzle to look at the brain and try to figure out something and see how the human brain is similar to the brain of other animals. But I am more pleased with the work I have been involved with in activism for the environment. That is, there I was not given promotions. So it's my volunteer work that I would like to mention.
And where did that stem from? Where did that interest in the environment, the climate come from? I know you're in Sydney and I'm in Queensland, so we're both sitting here in Australia. I know you're interested in light rail, which is trams to Americans and to Europeans, as a way of reducing our carbon footprint. But what was the spark? What had you seen something in your studies in neuroscience and you think, you know what, there's a correlation here?
Well, it was 1969. I read some of the work of de Molina and Rowland, the Nobelists who identified the problem with the erosion of the ozone layer. And at the end, they concluded, what the hell else has escaped us? And I started worrying. At that time, I was principally interested in social justice. And then I thought that unless the environmental issue is under control, all else we fight for will become irrelevant. Now, what the study of the brain has equipped me to say about the issue of the environment is a little bit tenuous, but it's there. In other words, if you look at the brain of humans and the brain of animals such as the other primates, the chimpanzee, the rhesus monkey, the marmoset, which I studied in parallel with the human brain, you're impressed. The most impressive thing I got from studying the brain was that there is no structural difference. That is, the areas of the brain that exist in the human are the same as those in the chimpanzee. That is, in whatever else we might be made in the image of the divine, as it concerns our brain, we are made in the image of the chimpanzee. And to understand that might induce some humility. At the moment, the brain is adored. Never since Narcissus looked at the reflection of his face on the surface of a river and fell in love with it, has there been such an adoration of a human organ as there is now of the brain, and never with such little justification. And I think it's a hubris to compare ourselves to gods, when in fact we're just another primate with this specialization of a larger brain, much like the giraffe has a larger neck, we have a larger brain. But we are a primate, and this might induce some humility in us if we understand who we are.
I think that's to me, that's profound, George, because what I say to people I work with and people who've been on the show is that we have forgotten as a species, I think, since the Industrial Revolution, that we are a sentient being, and that everything that has been valued for us in an industrialized world has been what exists from our prefrontal cortex backwards. Everything beneath that, or say beneath the eye level, is immaterial. In other words, we have realized that we are paid for what we think, and we're not paid for what we feel. And I'm sure you can remember, and I can remember days when we started our careers when we were certainly told, leave your emotions at the door, leave your family relationships at the door. You are here to work and to think, and not even to think, to do as you're told. And I think that is one of the biggest struggles that humans have today, is they have, and we're going to get onto this later if we get time, is they don't understand the coherence or homeostasis between heart and brain and the connection at a physiological, neurological, and just overall, emotional and mental well-being. But I think what you say is true, is that we've forgotten that we are sentient, and sentient means we have senses. We don't just operate from this space in our head.
That's right. In fact, the emotional considerations are the primary drivers. If you look at the conflicts, human conflicts, that should have been easily, cognitively, rationally taken care of, and yet we're plagued by them. And we are another primate. And if you look at the Attenborough, you don't need to be a psychologist. You can look at the Attenborough clips and see chimpanzees fight until the end. So if we understand who we are, that is to know ourselves, we must just refrain, that is, from constructing mousetraps.
Yes. And, on that point, if we are primates, if we think that nature adapts to its environment perfectly, right? And the animals tend to, in it, or the species, the organisms, the insects, tend to adapt to their environment as perfectly as they can whilst they stay on this planet. Does that not give us hope that humans have the capacity to do the same?
Well, indeed. I mean, the point I'm making in the novel that I wrote, spurred by concerns about the environment, is that the brain is not in the Goldilocks zone. The Earth is in the Goldilocks zone as it concerns its distance from the sun. Any closer, and it might be burned. Any further, and all would be frozen. But the brain is not. If it were smaller than what it is, it would not have been able to support language, which gave rise to science, which produced technology, which today threatens existence. If, on the other hand, the brain were larger, then it might have understood the problem, even solved it. The brain, I think, is not in the Goldilocks zone. The chimpanzees are not threatening themselves and the rest of us.
So that's interesting. So I know one of the conundrums that you answer is the human brain capable of solving the problems it's created? And that's what your point goes to, is that I guess it's been designed perfectly for a purpose, right? And beyond that, it doesn't have capacity. And then that takes us to, a slightly weird space, which is Neuralink and Elon Musk, whereas he believes that there is capacity to enhance brain's performance over and above which it's designed for.
Right. Firstly, just to belabor this issue of the brain being the right size. We have an environmental problem, and we are trying to solve it with a problematic brain. The problem is might be intractable given other things. That is the propensities that we're endowed with genetically. And consider a conversation I had with my 8-year-old granddaughter. I asked her, tell me something you will do today that does not pollute the planet. She said, running. I said, that's good, but if you run, you wear out your shoes and the factories have to construct more shoes. She said, running barefoot. I said, that's good, but if you run, you build up your appetite, and then they'll have to slaughter more chicken to bring to you to eat. She said, then sitting in a chair. I said, that's good, but to make a chair, you have to cut a tree. Then lying on the ground naked. And the problem is not easily solvable. And I don't think we have the emotional capacity to do it, given what we know about psychology and what has been done so far in similar circumstances. Of course, there are some nice examples of taking care of the ozone hole, at least temporarily, but that is far easier to fix than asking everyone to give up their cars, their airplanes, and to also reduce the population. That is, the problem is that we don't know why we're here. We stand puzzled before nature. We have a brain that has reptilian leftovers. We have medieval institutions and also emotions that are Paleolithic. And we don't understand who we are. So all these things do not augur well for, and at the moment, the evidence is that we're going in a direction, even with the technology and the achievements of AI, or even what you mentioned about Neuralink and Elon Musk. Those developments have not, there's no evidence they have improved the environment, which is the thing that everything else depends on. Science and technology should have assisted, but there's no evidence for that. And the likely is that with the increased technological advancements, we'll be able to exploit nature quicker. That is, we have an acceleration of CO2 emissions in the atmosphere, not a stabilization or a dramatic reduction that is required. As it concerns to produce this superhuman or this interface between the brain and technology, I not in that domain, except to say that if they are going to do any interface, they probably will need my maps, because I did the maps of the rat, the mouse, the monkey, the human.
Well, I think to your point there is that I think David Attenborough said, it may well be that the planet shakes off the human species because it doesn't need it. And to your point, we think we're a superior being because we are able to do the things we are with our mind and with technology, and build houses and cars and rockets and all the rest of it. Yet to the planet, we're insignificant. We are not necessary. And I think that's the issue that we haven't accepted, is that the planet will survive without us quite happily. In fact, far better without us.
Well, that's right. It's that hubris, that the human exceptionalism, that all else is irrelevant, that everything else is the background. In fact, the protagonist is the earth. And the ancients had dim view, the ancient gods at least, had a dim view of humans who compared themselves to them. And there was this story that I told my granddaughter again of the king of Corinth, Sisyphus, who was condemned by the gods to push a rock uphill, only for it to fall down and having to do the same exact thing the next day. Told her because he was narcissistic, egotistical, and insulting. And she said, like Trump.
I think I'm an ex-lawyer, an ex-English barrister at the very early stages of my career, a long time ago. So I see he got fined again today for breaching his gag order. I think whatever we believe of him, justice is coming his way in whatever capacity you want to consider that being. but it's interesting. So let's rewind a little bit, and we're gonna get into your book, A River Divider, which I'm fascinated by. But I just want to ask you a few questions because I know the audience is interested in this. So in today's world, because it is chaotic, and we have access to the internet, we have access to social media, it's very easy to learn, which was much harder when we were younger. We didn't have those resources. You had to go to a library. And so you see there's much more information out there about things like finding purpose, which we're talking about, the human's desire to know why we are here. And there's much more research into changing habits and patterns and behavior. And you talk about psychology, and I think the LSE did a study which is, I think it's 46 days or 4 to 6 weeks to change a new neural pathway. As you are an eminent neuroscientist who understands the brain itself, what is the most effective way for changing our patterns and behaviors and creating new neural pathways from your experience as a human and as a scientist?
Yeah, well, certainly education will induce some cognitive flexibility. You could see that to the extent that dogma is an indication of lack of flexibility. The more educated people are, the less likely they are to be adherents to any religion, for example. And now what neuroscientists have concluded, by and large, that is not all of them are of the same view, and might be the minority is correct, but we are a product of our environment and any genetic predisposition we inherited. That is, there's no freedom, there's no free will. We are slaves of yesterday, of the experiences we have had. Our brain will make the decisions. Nothing else makes the decision. The brain makes the decision. And the brain will decide on the basis of how it has been sculpted up to today. So we are slaves of yesterday, and the experience we will get today, of course, will be relevant to what decisions we'll make tomorrow. That is, it might seem pessimistic that we are slaves of yesterday, but in fact, psychologists are very clever. They discovered that today is tomorrow's yesterday. And they work on the person today to assist them to jettison the compulsions, the obsessions, the love with unrequited quieted love. So we have to firstly agree that we are a product of only two things. There are only two factors that determine behavior. The genes and the environment, and we are genes sculpted by the environment, and much like Praxiteles sculpted Hermes out of a block of marble. And this, I go into my novel on this because I have identical twins raised apart, and shows what different traits you can induce in people, even with the same DNA. That is, as different sculptors would sculpt different statues from the same block of marble, so different environments will produce different characters, even in identical twins. So if we accept that the environment is really only where you can act, then we emphasize education. So science is actually something that can contribute, though science itself, with its discoveries, have brought us to this place where we've constructed the mousetrap of atomic weapons and CO2 emissions. Otherwise, we wouldn't have, if we didn't have science. Science, again, will be the way to produce a sustainable planet. The scientists can predict things, and it is an objective domain. Science can make mistakes. It's not infallible, unlike the Pope. But it is self-correcting. So through education, through science, is the hope. And if we understand that we are nothing more but genes sculpted by the environment, then we have to concentrate on the environment to see if we can produce a sustainable society.
And so when you talk about the environment in a scientific sense or neuroscience sense or medical sense, the word which seems to be used now is epigenetics, which is our predisposition to chronic disease is now less than 3 or 4%, and it's epigenetics, so everything that we create in the environment around us. So what you're saying is, if we want to understand who we are, we want to move forward, we want to change our habits, behavior, we need to create the environment, which is not just our physical environment, it's our spiritual environment. It's the way that we frame language to ourselves. It's the whole living experience. We have to change our perspective of that. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. And the epigenetics that you mentioned is also environment. That is, if the drug habits of your own or your grandmother is affecting which genes are methylated in you, then that's an environmental influence that has worked on your genome to make certain genes more likely to produce their product than others. So again, it's the environment that one can see play a role even in earlier generations. But even that, of course, is another indication that freedom is nowhere to be found.
Yeah, well, here you go. So my question for you is like, there's lots of components here, but what we're really looking for as human beings is mental freedom. And the way I describe that is, if I can have no thoughts whatsoever, none, like just to exist and be, that is the purest place we can exist in, because that allows abundant opportunity to flow and creativity. So in your experience, in your practices, what is the simplest way? I know it takes time and practice, but the simplest way to get to that place of mental freedom, knowing that the mind is going to interfere all the time.
Right. Your striving to achieve that is an indication of the exposures you have received in your life that made you predisposed to at least attempt this path. I haven't. For me, the relaxation is getting on my bicycle and going around the park. Once I clear the nearby streets that I have to cross with a bicycle and the risks that associated with that, I feel like singing once I get into the park. So each one of us has their experience and will accordingly allow themselves this approach or the other. And if it works for you, that is fine. But at any given time, your decision is determined by the molding of your brain up to that point. Cannot be otherwise.
Isn't that interesting? So, hence why I guess there's so much emphasis on meditation, which I do as well, to settle the mind. Whereas I know that going for a walk in nature, and I'm fortunate to live in nature and next to the ocean, but with beautiful walking trails, is that going for a walk in nature not only enhances our spiritual well-being, but it has aerosols in the air. If you live in, we have eucalyptus and pine here that actually help us. So, I guess it's a practice that we have to choose the practice which works for us best. And I think why meditation is at the forefront is because it's something that everybody can attempt wherever they are at any given time, which is a beautiful practice.
Yeah, indeed. And it could be for some people the way to proceed. I never practiced meditation. I just haven't missed it yet, but perhaps I don't know what I'm missing.
Well, I think the good thing is if you don't need it, George, you're probably in pretty good shape. I just want to touch on something briefly, the pineal gland. Okay. Now, there are a lot of, I guess, modern day neuroscientists who talk about the connection to universe, source, God, whatever you want to call it, And the science says that the connection is through the concentration, the focus from the pineal gland, which is where manifestation comes from or creativity comes from. As a neuroscientist who has, has spent your life studying the human brain itself, look at its form as opposed to not in an MRI or a scan, how does that sit with you? How do you explain that?
Creativity and how possibly the pineal might set a gain so that achievement in that domain can be obtained. Well, I only simply, I really don't know, because I am like the proverbial person who tried to find, went into a windmill and try to find what is this beast, and you look at one cog and another cog, but you still don't know what's happening. I am just looking at the elements of the brain, and I don't claim any greater insight than someone who actually studies behavior, doesn't look at the brain at all. They're probably ahead of me, I'm far ahead. But I do have a perspective in the sense that I can tell that the elements are similar in us and other animals. And I can tell you this about other animals. Creativity in the Caledonian crow. Birds have had, you have heard bird brain, the expression. And in fact, we studied the brain. I spent 5 years studying the bird brain. And people are taken aback when I tell them that so much time I spent on that because of these comments. We think that birds have have excellent brain. They just have not had good public relations. And I want to tell you about the Caledonian crow, that if creativity in the Caledonian crow, that if you have them in a cage and you make available food outside the cage, unretrievable by the claws or beak, but you make available a piece of wire, straight piece of wire, they will fashion that wire into a hook and use it with a beak to retrieve the food. Well, that is, you see, creativity. So this, or for you, if you are going to decide how to go from Queensland to Western Australia and find a shortcut, well, that's creativity. So this is evident in every day. It's not that you don't have to be Edison and to discuss Edison to consider the issue of creativity. And I think it is in all animals, higher for in us. We have greater brain for the size than our body size should indicate. So we have a specialization.
Yeah, and I think one of the struggles that many people do, and I work with a lot of business owners, and one of the struggles they have is they lose their creativity and they want to understand, how do I get back to my creativity? And mainly it's because they're not doing tasks where they enjoy anymore. You say, your life has been a life of enjoyment, so you don't actually have to go looking for it, because most of the day you are actually fully immersed in vitality. And that is the difference, because you're doing things which are meaningful to you. It's as simple as that, right?
There is that 5% of the day that is actually very beautiful, but the rest of it is administration.
Yeah, none of us like that. But my rule is 80-20, at least 80% of your day, 24/7, 7 days a week, where you're doing activities which bring you energy and vitality. That way we stay in that creative space. Can we just touch on a little bit on heart-brain coherence and the cranial brain and the heart brain? I understood there are something like 10,000 different chemical markers within the heart that the cranial brain doesn't have. and the importance of that homeostasis for mood states. We talk about psychology and emotional states as to why we want to integrate these two organs, which every other sentient being does naturally, but we seem to have distanced ourselves from both. Can you just talk about the importance of that from an emotional and, I guess, a physiological standpoint?
Yes, Ed, and I will remove one of the two factors in your multiplication there, the heart. That is, the heart, of course, the ancient Egyptians heedlessly discarded the brain in funerary practices and sent millennia of pharaohs brainless to their afterlife, but they kept the heart. And there was this medical scientist, Hippocrates, who gave the greatest praise to the brain. Humans should know that from the brain and brain alone derive our gestures, laughter, and joys, as well as our grief, pain, and sorrow. Unfortunately, Aristotle took a different view, thought that the brain was there to cool the blood, air conditioning. And there was another person there who was an admirer, after Aristotle, admirer of Hippocrates, that was Galen. And the cardiocentric view of Aristotle battled it with the encephalocentric view of Galen and Hippocrates until modern age, when you have in the Merchant of Venice, Portia asks, where is fancy, which means love, where is fancy bred, or in the heart, or in the head? And of course, science, you would have thought, would have solved this problem. But when I went in Bondi Junction to pick up a card for my loved one on Valentine's Day, I was confronted with 300 cards, all of them with at least one red heart on them, none of them with the brain. So I was forced to write a letter in the conversation, darling, I love you from the bottom of my brain. And I received a call from a lady journalist, ABC Melbourne, and she asked, are you insisting that the heart has nothing to do with love? I said, if in a heart transplant I receive your heart, I am not going to fall in love with your husband. And she said, what a pity. And he's such a lovely man. So the heart has nothing to do with emotions. It's a pump, slave to the activity of the brain, which of course controls the spinal cord as well.
Okay, so in that respect, if we were to say that the mind is capable of manipulating any thought, like so, and the context I'm going to give for this is intuition, right? So our internal warning sign or danger signals. So say, I'll give you a specific example. Someone I was working with in business, and she desperately wanted to create a new business because she hadn't been successful in the past. And she had a business partner who, there were many warnings. Like internally, she was feeling just
uneasy, unwell,
under attack emotionally. Yet, and we had this conversation of saying, you know, that this is not going to end well because every conversation is not going the way that you wanted to. You have warnings about money, values, ethics, everything is in conflict. And she said, yes, but I want this so badly, I've got to go through with it. And therefore she went through it. And of course it didn't end well. So in her case, the mind, the logic mind was able to say, look, this is not working for you. However, there is something more powerful that I can overcome. So the logic can overcome the thought process and create a new logic which says it's okay, even while this incredible warning sign is saying no, 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 no. So how do you explain that in how the system works? And how we become better at that?
Right. Firstly, Ed, you said that the mind can manipulate thought, right?
Mm.
No, not for many neuroscience. Again, I'm presenting the common view in neuroscience, and it could be false. We don't settle the score on the basis of who votes, how many people vote for this. But the mind is a slave to the brain. The mind cannot influence the brain. It would be nice if it could. Wouldn't be nice to jettison our Alzheimer's disease. So most of us will be, virtually every one of us will be visited by dementia by the time we get to 100. If only we could order our neurons to throw away some of the plaques, neurofibrillary tangles that are the hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease and free ourselves of this. No, the mind has no influence on the brain. The mind, the narrator, the person who speaks to you now, we don't exactly know what all these things, how consciousness arises. The neuroscientists do not know. They're puzzled, but they do know some things, such as that it is the brain that decides. It is the puppeteer. The mind is the puppet in the debate mind and brain. The brain decides. The mind cannot influence the brain. So the issue that you mentioned, that she had some qualms, she was not feeling that well to go into this relation, but then cognitively she said, oh no, I think I'll make it work. I'll be able to overcome this. Yeah, it should work. Well, I think, yes, this conjecture, you don't need to be brain cartographer to come up with this, and many people have said it, that you can consider the brain as the Australian Parliament, or if you like, the Republican caucus in the US, that you have different civil war. That is one area of the brain is saying this, the other is this. You are a unitary organism. At the end, you will make a step forward or a step back, and there will be one behavior. But meanwhile, in there is a struggle, a civil war. And this is what is misinterpreted as choice, that I am going to decide. No, the brain decides and informs you, and you cannot have any influence. The mind cannot have influence on the brain. So this is what was happening at the level. Maybe the hypothalamic activity was indicating to her one thing, possibly, let's say, attraction, repulsion at the physical level for this person, that was going to the mix with many other things, with the history of experiences with that person. So, yeah, if you consider it that way, I believe you can have some feeling of what might be happening in this situation where, as you said, the person feels that she shouldn't be going, but on the other hand, says, no, I should be able to make this work.
Yeah, it's like you on your bicycle seeing an approaching light which goes from green to amber and thinking, one part of you thinks I can make it, and the other one says no death. It's like, which one wins? It's the same principle. But
yeah, well, that's right. A computation, and one thing you're saying, look, I am late, I better take this chance, and the other says no, you might not make it to work.
Yeah, and I guess there's this concept in Tibetan Buddhism called, I think it's called Bhavanga, which is event, thought, feeling, reaction, the way that the cognitive cycle works and how we react. And the theory is that, or the practice is that, by experience, we can stop the reactive process and actually wind back so the event never happens in the first place. And we do that through experience or through the environment, which is, I've done this enough times to know that if I expose myself again, I'm going to expose myself to harm. So that's the brain, because the narrator is still talking, right? But the brain is saying, hold on, your experience, the emotional experience of that before is so painful, we don't want to do that again. It's time to stop. That's where the brain is kicking in, saying enough.
Well,
but it's conscious. There's a consciousness in there.
Again, I'm presenting you what I perceive to be the majority view, but the brain decides in neurological darkness. and informs the narrator, which is what is speaking to you now. And the narrator thinks that I made that decision. I weighted the different factors and took into account this and that. But this is done precognitively before you are aware. At least, again, that is the view by. But I think that this view, though it doesn't explain consciousness, we are lost there, the neuroscientists, but it does explain certain behaviors. It will explain that if you and I were born in a country where they stone women for allegedly burning their holy books, you and I would have equal chance in participating in the stoning as men born there today, if we accept that, of course. In other words, we are the product of our environment, and there's nothing else but genes and environment. There's no freedom, there's no free will to elbow its way in the parade, genes, environment.
So in order to change that pattern of behavior which doesn't serve us, we have to change our environment and our perspective of that environment in order to push forwards.
Yes, and to change the environment itself. For example, to go to a psychiatrist to help you, to go to even a friend. That brain will have to make a decision to change or not. And this is where education can add flexibility to the system, because it exposes you to many points of view and will create in your brain a different foci that will be competing, not just one dogma that will be governing you.
And I guess we have to change, or the narrator has to change the story, because if you don't change the story, nothing's going to change. That's the point. It's that the puppeteer has got to see a shift in the way the puppeteer talks or acts. In other words, it's like saying to someone who's unwell, go and see the doctor. No, I'm fine. And eventually they either go or they die. They have to change the narration of that story.
Yeah, well, that's right. But that even going to the doctor predisposes is whether you have had the background that will allow you to go that direction rather than another direction. I mean, how many people avoid the doctors? We can see the paradoxical behavior in vaccination, for example, when you have evidence, scientific evidence, and it is ignored. I mean, these same people that will take the airplane, which they trust that it will take them to London without dropping them in the Indian Ocean, and yet they don't trust the vaccines, which were produced by the same science, the same method. It's not infallible, but certainly gets you to London without dropping you, at least not often, in the ocean.
Yeah, let's not get onto the subject of vaccinations. I'm not sure that's going to be a good place to go for the time being.
We have enough to deal with.
Yeah. Well, I guess science, in the work that you do, eventually they'll start, if they start dissecting brains which have, with COVID, I'm sure they're doing it already, and seeing what's happening in vaccinations. Anyway, it's a different world. But let's talk about something slightly more cheerful for a second, which is your book. Okay, so you have this incredible book, A River Divided. Do you want to explain? And it's taken you 21 years to write it and publish it. So do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because it's fascinating. As an academic author of academic, scientific, peer-reviewed articles, to go and write a work of fiction it's been done before, but not often. And I think it's a beautiful way of expression. So can you share a little bit about how that whole journey came about? Maybe who influenced your writing style? Maybe you had none. I don't know.
No. Maybe a number of people would say I still don't have one, but I certainly tried. And you mentioned the time it took me. It was, in fact, just before submitting it for publication that a friend saw me writing it at my Italian coffee shop where I normally go in Bondi Junction in Sydney. And she said the usual question. She asked, "How is the book going?" I said, 21 years and still not finished. She said, "My cousin's novel was published posthumously." I said, "You are giving me hope." And yeah, why it was really failure leading to fiction in my case. I failed in the efforts to bring back the trams to Sydney, though they came 30 years later from the time I was struggling to bring them back. But meanwhile, for 10 years after I failed, I was thinking, if I only could write a novel where I could take the reader with me in the arc of the hero, I could inform and entertain with the novels to make it appealing, and sensitize the reader to the things that the neuroscientists, the environmental scientists know about the brain, about the state of the world. But I didn't have the vehicle to do that. I didn't have an idea until one pre-Christmas party, one of the many that we have in Australia, given that we coincide Christmas and summer. One friend said, "You're going to Spain. You should go and see San Juan de Compostela, where the bones of St. James are buried."
Well, you did the pilgrimage?
Well, I simply thought that it would be great to get some DNA to see how this guy looked like.
Right.
And then I thought, why not somebody far greater? And I mentioned this story to plot to my friends that came all in mind that day, at that moment. And they said to me, "It's a good story. You should write it." And little did I know that I had a long road ahead. I didn't give up because I saw it improving. It was so low, the quality of my writing, that it could only encourage me as I was working. I saw it improving, and I took lessons from Bryce Courtney, the most successful author in Australia.
And how did you take a course, or is he a friend?
Yeah, a course, but actually he gave me the greatest encouragement. He said that was the best plot he had heard in years. And it was only a plot at that time. But I had a nice journey, meeting new friends, a different perspective, the writers, which are still together, like in the get-togethers that I organize in Bondi Junction, which you might know is the new Athens of the South, in the cognitive fertile crescent between Coles, Woolworths, and Target.
Yeah, I know Bondi Junction.
Yeah, you have heard of course, of Athens, of Rome, of London. It is now Bondi Junction that supersedes all the other. But anyway, we get together and we discuss such things as the environment and free will. And yeah, the friends were a different set of mind that you meet there amongst the writers. So it has been a pleasant journey. And what I find is that the neuroscience, the issues that you kindly asked me today, are not widely known. That is, that these issues are virtually settled in psychology. The issue of free will. You will not find a neuroscientist that will tell you you have unlimited free will. They will all tell you either you have none, that's the majority will tell you that, or they'll tell you that there may be some modicum of free will somewhere. And this really has implications for society at large in how we deal with crime, the rehabilitation issue, that you cannot possibly have a retributive punishment. And actually, a lot of in the law, a lot of people in the lawyer profession, in the law, have a reasonable view on that. I had the pleasure of speaking to Supreme High Court justices when they decided to hear something different, and they came to Neuroscience Research Australia, where I'm working, and I told them much what I've been telling you, that you cannot possibly praise anybody and you cannot condemn anybody, because we are a product of the environment and our genes. And you can only, there is no praise and there is no punishment that you can meter out. It is behavior modification you can actually do by assisting the person in the environment to be conducive to the things that are pro-social and not anti-social. But you cannot accuse the individual who has no freedom, if you accept that neuroscience view. And the justice actually agreed, those who spoke to me, that there's no room for retributive justice.
Yeah, so when I was a young criminal lawyer, we spent a lot of time at universities studying things like recidivism and retribution rehabilitation, and it's a topic we could have a whole different conversation on, I think, in relation to that, crime and punishment, or the ability to change the dynamics. And of course, if you don't change the epigenetics or the environment, nothing's going to change. So how do you introduce that? And then you can, we can talk about things like, or we could, things like TMS and cytosine and ketamine flushing for resetting the human brain after PTSD and depression. So there's really good clinical research on that, like 87% efficacy in some of the trials in Australia. But that's chemically induced as opposed to, it's epigenetics of a different kind.
Yeah, well, that's right. Well, science is finding, as you point out, ways of assisting the person, and certainly you don't. If the person had free will, who wouldn't want to jettison their compulsions, their obsessions that are tormenting them, and if they get some help, through modern medicine. That will be great. The issue, because coming back to the novel, why write it? Why shouldn't I stay with academia? I mean, Australia is one of the worst examples of people acting against themselves in the wake of the largest fires in recorded history in 2019-20, and before the almost certain loss of all corals in the Great Barrier Reef and elsewhere, Australia persists to be the largest exporter of brown coal in the world, the fossil fuel that stokes the fires that burn us. If that is not working against our interests, and they've been electing governments that have had a large percentage of global warming, anthropogenic global warming deniers. This is a paradox. So we need to think of how to present the evidence, and whatever else we do in medicine, if you lose the habitability of the atmosphere, if you are constructing a CO2 sarcophagus over our heads, is irrelevant. So that has to be sorted out first. And Australia is perhaps the worst example of an advanced country of high standard of living to be one of the principal saboteurs in the international effort to stabilize the climate.
Yeah, the interesting thing in where I live in Queensland in Australia is that we have 2 or 3 projects, green tech projects, renewables projects, which, if built in the next 10 years, will contribute, I think, more than, well, 2 of them alone will power 75% of all the residential homes in Queensland using renewable energy. So there's a paradox there as well, is that federal government, state governments looking after what they can do. But I think to rewind for the audience, as an environmentalist, first and foremost now, and a scientist which has paid the bills for life, shall we say, what do you advise? You talked about your granddaughter. You know, I've got my children are 13 or 14. They're very interested. They're very passionate about protecting our environment. And everything you've learned and all of your activism, and even when your activism hasn't worked, what's the one bit of advice you can give to the audience about how we actually make a difference at an individual level?
Individual level, probably, I mean, it's what the scientists say, really, in the product of population times affluence. That is, if you have a lot of people, if you double the people, you double the problem. The impact will be double. So at least to attend to the easy things, the easy pickings, the low-hanging fruit, such as control the population. But there you have the medieval institutions, the religions, who are opposed to family planning, which would be one of the ways to assist in the stabilization of the climate. And you have the Catholic Church telling you that HIV is evil, but not as evil as prophylactics, who might assist people to plan their family, but they are obsessed. The Catholic Church is obsessed with sex. So we've got to really get out of the dogma and look at it scientifically, the ways that we can assist. The individual level, yes, you can do whatever you can, but it has to be structurally, and the news is not going to be great. The restrictions that will have to be placed on human behavior will, to produce a sustainable climate, will make the old Soviet Union look like a libertarian society. You will not be able to use your car. You will not have a car. It is not possible to make enough cars ad infinitum without turning, even with the renewable energy that you mentioned, without turning the planet into a big rock. So the issue is, I think what's ahead of us is definitely loss of civilization and also likely extinction, when all the CO2 that we have emitted really exerts effect over the next 1,000 years, the end of the millennium, where the temperature is likely to increase from 17 to 24 degrees above the pre-industrial level. So there's no chance humans will achieve this, given what we know about things, the brain and human behavior, and rat behavior for that matter, because acquisiveness and avarice is in the rat. It doesn't have to be humans to show acquisiveness and avarice. But there is also nothing more important than trying to construct a sustainable society. So that's what made me spend that time to write a novel, in the hope that I will sensitize the reader to what is known in the domain. So it's the case of science is nonfiction, but I used fiction to present some science mixed in with tragedy, with the issue of religion, and a lot of forms of love, from the point of view, again, of the neuroscientist and the environmentalist.
So effectively what we're saying is, if the demise of humanity is inevitable due to the way that the human mind is wired to dealing with these issues, then what we're trying to do is achieve longevity whilst we're here.
Oh, I would rather concentrate on preserving the species. I think there's nothing more, in nature, there's nothing immoral. But if there were something immoral, it would be that this generation sets the conditions for the extinction of its own progeny in a terrestrial inferno.
Yeah, that's profound, and I guess the younger generations, it's why they're so passionate, because they see the writing on the wall because of all the information they have, and they also see that not a lot is really happening. There's a lot of talk, but there's not really a huge amount of action because they can't agree on it. So it's but last question for you, George, before we wrap up, just a fun one. In your writing, I've heard of, and I have a mentor. I have a trilogy I'm trying to write at the moment. Probably take me as long as it took you. And there's this notion of pantser and planner in fiction writing. You know, do you write by the seat of your pants, or do you plan everything out? I mean, after 21 years, did you just go and write a few hours a day, or was it structured?
In my case, it was structured. I got the idea, and when I told my mentors, because I had many mentors, writers, mentors, they were telling me, no, leave yourself free. I couldn't do it that way. So I guess I was of the planning type.
You're a planner.
As a scientist. But if I can say my last comment to your audience, that I wish that their brain shrinks less than expected for their age.
There you go. Beautiful. And you can find A River Divided on Amazon, I guess, all the usual channels. And in the show notes will be links to that as well. So, George, it's been an absolute pleasure, incredibly insightful. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and insights with the audience today.
Thank you for the pleasure, Ed.